Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video is a quick career review for Amir Khan. Of course, in the past week or so, Amir Khan has announced his retirement from the sport of boxing after a 17-year pro career in which he reached a record of 34 wins, 6 defeats, 21 of those 34 wins coming by way of knockout. I would say Amir Khan throughout his career was a polarizing figure. Some liked him, some hated him, but as far as I'm concerned, Amir Khan's career from start to finish, for better or worse, for good, bad and the ugly, has been extremely entertaining. There's no doubt about that. Amir Khan, born on the 8th of December 1986, he took to boxing at a young age and immediately figured that he had a talent for it. His blaring hand speed and raw natural athleticism caught the eye of many coaches. After a while, he managed to get on the England squad, where he eventually qualified for the 2004 Athens Olympic Games. He was the only boxer for Team GB in those games. Just Amir Khan, the 17-year-old from Bolton. And quite frankly, there wasn't much expectation on Amir Khan. However, after winning the initial 2 rounds, mainstream media started to cover the story. He eventually got to the Olympic final where he fought Cuban legend Mario Kindelan, and he lost that fight 22 points to 30 points. Amir Khan left the Olympic Games with a silver medal at only 17 years old at lightweight. He stayed in the amateurs for a little while longer and even avenged his defeat to Mario Kindelan in his last amateur fight. I even believe this fight was televised on terrestrial TV. I might be wrong about that, but it was at Bolton Stadium. So as an amateur, Amir Khan at this point in time was already a big draw. His success in the Olympic Games turned Amir Khan into a household name. Amir Khan would soon turn pro at 18 years old. He turned pro on the 16th of July 2005. His initial fights were televised on ITV4. You know, his early fights were what they were. Amir Khan was fighting your usual journeymen, David Bailey, Baz Carey, Steve Geffen, etc. It wasn't until Amir Khan fought Rashid Drilzane where flaws in Amir Khan's game started to reveal themselves. Rashid Drilzane was an Algerian based out of France, and he was a tough guy, nothing special, but in this fight, he applied a lot of pressure on Amir Khan, and while Amir Khan clearly won this fight, as it played out, Amir Khan was getting tagged more and more and more, and the lack of technical skills in regards to defense was apparent. Yes, he had great athleticism, great hand speed, but the boxing IQ was questionable, I would say. In this fight, indeed, he actually got dropped, I believe in like the 7th round, something like that. He got dropped where he tried to hold himself up with the ropes, but the referee countered it as a knockdown. I know it doesn't state it on BoxRec, but this was Amir Khan's first knockdown in the professional ranks. Following that, Amir Khan once again fought journeyman Mohamed Mejaji and Steffi Bull, who now of course is a trainer. Amir Khan's biggest test at this point in time came on the 14th of July 2007, 2 years after he turned pro. He was fighting the experienced British contender Willie Lemond. Now Willie Lemond was a really tricky boxer, very experienced, a good fighter at domestic level, and this was a test for Amir Khan, and he had some trouble in this fight, to tell you the truth. In round 6, Amir Khan was dropped quite heavily against Willie Lemond, and Willie Lemond wasn't a noted puncher. Very few knockouts on his record, but Amir Khan was badly hurt. In fact, the count he got in this fight was very long. At this point in time, people started to question the chin of Amir Khan, though Amir Khan, he managed to walk through the fire, and he stopped Willie Lamond in round 8 after dropping him in round 7. In this fight, he won his first professional title, which was the Commonwealth lightweight title. He then defended the title against Scott Lawton and Graham Earl. Now, Graham Earl actually is from my local area, the Earl of Luton, Graham Earl, and I knew a few people who went down there only for Graham Earl to get blasted out in a few seconds, a minute and 12 seconds to be precise. Following the fight with Graham Earl, he fought, Australian Gary St Clair. Amir Khan was extended all 12 rounds for the first time in his career, but he won the fight clearly, he won the fight decisively, and, it was a good boxing display by Amir Khan. At this point in time, Amir was starting to get hype. He was working well with his trainer at the time, Oliver Harrison, and things were starting to look up for Amir Khan. People were talking about future world title fights, things of that nature. He followed up with a win over Danishman Martin Christiansen, and he won that fight by a 7th round TKO, where he picked up the WBO Intercontinental lightweight title. So at this point, Amir Khan was world ranked. Once again, he defended his Commonwealth title against Michael Gomez. Michael Gomez, of course, a fan favourite amongst domestic UK boxing fans. Michael Gomez, an aggressive guy, always came to fight. One of the most loved domestic fighters in recent years, and Amir Khan got rid of Michael Gomez in 5 rounds. Following the Michael Gomez fight, Amir Khan would fight unknown Colombian puncher Barrera Prescott. Going into the fight, not much was expected from Prescott. He was unknown, unheralded, and Amir Khan was expected to win decisively. This fight was televised on Sky Sports pay-per-view. In fact, Amir Khan's initial fights up until Michael Gomez, as I mentioned, were shown on ITV4. However, this fight right here, with Prescott and beyond, Amir Khan would leave ITV4 to fight on different platforms, this one being on Sky Sports Box Office. Barrera Prescott comes out in this fight, immediately lands a hard jab on Amir Khan, which stuns his legs. His legs are wobbled a little bit, and he follows up with a huge overhand right, which drops Amir Khan heavily. At this point in time, the referee could have stopped it there, but Amir Khan beat the count, and Prescott jumped right on him and finished him in brutal fashion. A first round knockout loss for Amir Khan. And at this point in time, people were writing off Amir Khan, saying that his chin is so bad, he's never going to be a world champion, that he's got so many flaws in his defense, he's going to get exposed time and time again when he steps up. Following the defeat to Barrera Prescott, Amir Khan returned quite quickly. He fought in December of 2008 after getting knocked out in the September of that year. He fought the tough Irishman Oisin Fagan, and he won the fight by a 2nd round TKO. Quite frankly, he blitzed Fagan in this fight. On the 14th of March 2009, Amir Khan would fight the most notable opponent of his career in the Mexican legend Marco Antonio Barrera, most known of course by British fans for beating the unbeaten Naseem Hamed. In this fight, has to be said, despite Marco Antonio Barrera being a really big name, he was faded at this point, gone through a lot of wars, he was old, over 70 fights at this point in time. But, Barrera still had name value, and in this fight, Amir Khan won by a technical decision, basically won every single round. Barrera had a bad cut in this fight, and Amir Khan wins by technical decision. Following the Barrera fight, Amir Khan gets a world title shot, and he had to fight the Ukrainian champion, Andrei Kotelnik. Now, Andrei Kotelnik, when you say his name, it might not mean much these days, but Andrei Kotelnik was a pretty decent fighter in his day. And Amir Khan won this fight decisively, 12 rounds to 0. He completely outboxed Andre Kotelnik. Kotelnik was a very capable boxer. Before the Amir Khan fight, he got a win over Marcus Maidana. And after the Amir Khan fight, many people felt that he beat Devon Alexander and got robbed. So Kotelnik was a world-level fighter at the time, and Amir Khan completely took him apart and outboxed him over 12 rounds. Following the Kotelnik win, Amir Khan fought the lightly regarded but unbeaten Dmitry Salita. This fight actually was kind of promoted as like Islam versus Judaism, because Dmitry Salita was Jewish. But yeah, Amir Khan in this fight completely destroyed Dmitry Salita, dropped him three times in the first round, and yeah, knocked him out in one. Easy fight for Amir Khan. Following the Salita fight, Amir Khan fought well-known contender Paulie Malignaggi. Of course, Paulie Malignaggi went on to be a two-weight world champion. And this was in Madison Square Garden, Amir Khan's US debut. And he won this fight easily. Paulie Malignaggi, in reality, yes, he was a good boxer. Yes, he was tricky. Yes, he was awkward, but he had no power. And stylistically, Paulie Malignaggi was a good opponent for Amir Khan, but nevertheless, a good name for Amir Khan. And yeah, Amir Khan stops Paulie Malignaggi in the 11th round of their fight. Really, it was a barrage. Paulie Malignaggi could never get in the fight. He was overwhelmed by Amir Khan's speed, his volume, and yeah, in round 11, he was TKO'd. Following the Malignaggi fight, he fights Argentinian puncher and fan favourite Marcus Maidana. Now, I remember when this fight was signed, and I was convinced that Amir Khan would get knocked out, like he was against Bradis Prescott. However, it wasn't the case. In fact, this fight, I believe, was the 2010 Ring Magazine Fight of the Year. It was tremendous. Early on, Amir Khan blitzed Marcus Maidana, drops him with a looping body shot in round 1. And yeah, Marcus Maidana looked done at that point in time. It looked like a first round knockout for Amir Khan. But Marcus Maidana, being the tough guy that he is, beats the count and survives. Amir Khan dominates the early rounds, but as the fight plays out, Marcus Maidana's pressure starts to get to Amir Khan. Late on in that fight, Amir Khan was caught by bombs, and he was badly hurt on wobbly legs. I've got no idea how Amir Khan wasn't dropped in this fight, because he was taking bombs. And as the fight played out, the fight got closer and closer and closer, because Maidana was winning the rounds based on his work rate and his heavier punches. However, Amir Khan saw out the 12 rounds and was awarded a close unanimous decision. Excellent fight for Amir Khan. And, this was, it really was, at the point in time at least, it kind of put the Bradis Prescott fight to bed finally. Following the Maidana fight, Amir Khan once again fought in the UK, and he fought domestic rival, I guess you would say, Paul McCloskey, and he won the fight by a 6th round technical decision. Now, this wasn't a great fight. Paul McCloskey was very awkward, very tricky. There was a lot of holding, a lot of head clashes in this fight. In fact, the fight was ended by a technical decision where Amir Khan won the fight on points. Not a great fight, was what it was. Following the Paul McCloskey fight, once again Amir Khan fights in America against well-known veteran Zab Judah. Going into this fight, Zab Judah passed his best, but Zab Judah did have power, so there were some question marks going into this fight surrounding Amir Khan, but Khan completely outboxed Zab Judah in this fight, and he knocked him out in round 5 with a body shot. Now, in this fight, Zab Judah tried to say that it was low. It was on the belt line. Zab Judah went down, and he didn't beat the count. Quite frankly, I think that Zab Judah was looking for a way out in this fight. I think he basically quit, quite frankly. So, 2010 and 2011 were really good years for Amir Khan, beating the likes of Malinaji, Maidana and Zabjuda in 4 fights. That's a pretty good run. And obviously in 09, beating Kotelnik. At this point in time, Amir Khan was on a good run. And December of 2011, 10th of December, he fought the rugged Lamont Peterson in Peterson's hometown of Washington. Now, this was a unification fight. I believe at the time... No, it wasn't a unification fight, sorry. But, you know, Lamont Peterson was a very good contender at the time. Really tough, had fought some good opposition. Had that kind of swarming style where he liked to fight on the inside and really work you over. And that's what he was doing against Amir Khan. Early on, Khan started this fight pretty well from my recollection. Yeah, he dropped Lamont Peterson in round 1. And early on, he was boxing up Lamont Peterson. But once again, Amir Khan being susceptible to pressure, you know, Lamont Peterson got on his chest and really started making this fight horrible, to the point where Amir Khan looked really uncomfortable. In fact, in round 7, he got a point deducted for pushing Lamont Peterson away, and again in the 12th for doing the same thing. Now, this fight was surrounded in controversy. Many people felt that the referee was harsh on Amir Khan, and many people felt the scores were unfair. Amir Khan lost this fight by a split decision. Now, I felt the referee was a little bit too, you know, keen on penalising Khan. However, in regards to the scorecards, I don't think this fight was that controversial. I felt it was a very close fight. I think Peterson certainly had a say that he won this fight, and he was awarded the decision. Also, there was the infamous man in the hat ringside. Amir Khan was trying to say that he was somehow involved in him getting robbed. I forgot the story, but it was hilarious, man. Basically insinuating that he was interfering with the judges. But yeah, it was a great fight, by the way, but Amir Khan lost a 12-round split decision. Following the Lamont Peterson fight, he was actually rescheduled to fight Lamont Peterson. And by the way, just I failed to mention, I need to go back a little bit. After the Bradis Prescott fight, up until this point, Amir Khan was trained by Oliver Harrison. But when he got knocked out by Bradis Prescott, he sacked Oliver Harrison and treated him appallingly, to be honest. Oliver Harrison got a lot of stick after this fight, but he sacks Oliver Harrison, and for the Barrera fight, he joins up with Freddie Roach. Just wanted to put that out there. But regardless, after the Lamont Peterson fight, Amir Khan was supposed to rematch Lamont Peterson. However, Lamont Peterson tested positive for PEDs. In fact, I believe it was elevated levels of testosterone. As a result, Amir Khan would seek a new opponent, and he settled on unbeaten Danny Garcia, who had a record of 23-0 and was a noted puncher. However, at this point in time, Danny Garcia was viewed as more of a titleist, more so than a world champion, if that makes sense. Because before this fight, Danny Garcia had struggled with the likes of Ashley Fearpain and an old Eric Morales. So Amir Khan was the big favourite going into this fight. And yeah, it was a unification fight as well. I believe Amir Khan kept his WBA title because Peterson tested positive. Danny Garcia was the WBC champion. So yeah, it was a unification fight. Amir Khan started this fight pretty well in the first couple of rounds. He was overwhelming Danny Garcia with his speed, but Danny Garcia was trying to catch Amir Khan coming in with his left hook. But early on in this fight, he was quite inaccurate. So Amir Khan won the first 2 rounds, but you could see from what Danny Garcia was doing, if he catches Amir Khan, it could be big trouble. And in round 3, Danny Garcia made a slight tactical adjustment. He started to target the body of Amir Khan a lot more, trying to hold Amir Khan in place, slow his feet down. And you know, Khan responded by exchanging. And in round 3, Amir Khan inexplicably throws an uppercut from basically the outside. Danny Garcia times that with a big left hook, and down goes Amir Khan. He beats the count on unsteady legs and makes it through to round 4. At the start of round 4, Amir Khan dropped again, and once again beats the count, only to get dropped again. At this point in time, the referee, who I believe was Kenny Bayliss, stops the fight. Amir Khan, back-to-back defeats, and, once again people are questioning where Amir Khan stands at world level. In fact, this fight right here was the last time Amir Khan was a world champion. Following the fight with Danny Garcia, Amir Khan, he basically changed trainer, and he would then go to trainer of Andre Ward, Virgil Hunter. On Amir Khan's comeback, he fought on, I think this was the Broner, it was a Broner undercard, I'm pretty sure, and he fought the unbeaten Mexican Carlos Molina, though Carlos Molina was pretty unknown, not a big puncher, and Amir Khan won the fight by 10-round retirement. He stopped Carlos Molina in 10 rounds. Looked pretty decent in this fight, if memory serves me correct. Following the Carlos Molina fight, Amir Khan fought veteran and I believe former lightweight champion Julio Diaz. Now, I was at this fight in the Sheffield Arena. Funnily enough, Deontay Wilder was on the undercard against Audley Harrison. And yeah, this was a great fight. Amir Khan was expected to win. Julio Diaz coming off a draw to Sean Porter. But, Julio Diaz was seen as past his best at this point in time. But he gave Amir Khan a really hard fight. And as you can see by the scores, very close fight. Amir Khan was dropped in round 4 and tagged up throughout the fight. Very close scorecards. I felt Amir Khan just about nicked it, but it was close. And yeah, at this point in time, I remember thinking that Amir Khan was done at elite level. I thought there was no way back at this point in time. Though following the Julio Diaz fight, Amir Khan then fought Luis Collazo. I want to say this was on the undercard of Mayweather versus Maidana. Let me have a look. I'm pretty sure it was. Let me have a look. Yeah, it was on the undercard of Mayweather versus Maidana. And he fought the veteran Luis Collazo. Luis Collazo being a tricky southpaw with decent power, very sneaky, former world champion himself. And I felt going in that this was a dangerous fight for Amir Khan. However, Amir Khan completely bossed this fight, won all 12 rounds. Collazo was down twice in this fight. 3 times in this fight. He was down once in round 4, twice in round 10. And as you can see by the scorecards, man, this fight was wide. 119-104, 117-106. Very wide fight in favour of Amir Khan. And Khan looked really good in this fight. And it's worth noting, in the summer of 2014, this was when Amir Khan versus Kell Brook, the talks of that fight, was at its fever pitch, because in the August of that year, Kell Brook would go to America and defeat Sean Porter. The fight was being spoken about for quite some time, but this was really when the fight was at its height, I would say, in regards to popularity. Everybody in the UK wanted to see this fight. Amir Khan was coming off a good win over Collazo and a good performance, whereas Brook just won his world title. Ultimately, in and around this period right here is when Khan versus Brook should have happened. It was boiling for a long time. Of course, in 2011, 2012, they had their episode on Sky Sports Ringside, which was a boxing show where both guys were on the set and both guys were insulting each other, trash talking. That really sowed the seeds. But in 2014, 2015 was when the fight was at its fever pitch. Following the Luis Collazo fight, Amir Khan puts on another really good display, and he defeated Devin Alexander over 12 rounds, basically won all 12 rounds, completely bossed the fight, outboxed Devin Alexander, outlanded him in 12 rounds, very easy for Amir Khan. And yet again, in and around this point in time, the Brook fight should have happened. Following the Alexander fight, Amir Khan fought Chris Algieri, and I remember at the time, a lot of people were complaining about this fight. Of course, Algieri is not a noted puncher, and he was coming off a one-sided loss to Manny Pacquiao. You know, people accused Amir Khan of avoiding punches, and that Chris Algieri really did nothing for him at this point in time. However, the fight was a lot more competitive than anybody was expecting. Chris Algieri completely changed his style in this fight. I believe he was trained by John David Jackson for this fight. But Chris Algieri completely changed his style, and he basically applied pressure behind a high guard, and he was working Amir Khan in certain rounds. In fact, Chris Algieri actually buzzed Amir Khan in one of the middle rounds. Amir Khan, however, was awarded the unanimous decision. Some people actually felt Chris Algieri won this fight. Honestly, I felt Amir Khan nicked it. It was close, but I felt Amir Khan won. Now, this point in time right here arguably spelled the end of Amir Khan's career at any real level as a world level contender. Inexplicably, the fight with Saul Canelo Alvarez was announced at middleweight, well, in particular at a catch weight of 155 pounds. Going in, it was viewed as a suicide mission, and that's exactly how the fight played out. Amir Khan started the fight okay. He was tagging Canelo up with some good straight quick punches, but he really wasn't troubling Canelo. Canelo was taking a look for the first couple of rounds, and as soon as Canelo started to find Amir Khan's body, it was basically a write-off. It was basically done. Amir Khan's leg slowed, and then Canelo Alvarez catches Amir Khan with a picture-perfect overhand right. Amir Khan is out for the count, asleep, brutal knockout. Definitely the most brutal knockout of Amir Khan's career so far, the most brutal knockout loss, I should say. Following the Canelo defeat, there was a lot of question marks over Khan's future in the sport of boxing. But he signed a 3-fight deal with Matchroom, with the third fight it was supposed to be Kell Brook. He fought Phil Greco in a comeback fight. A lot of trash talk in the build-up to this fight, but Amir Khan knocked out Phil Greco in the first round. A very easy fight for Amir Khan. Amir Khan would follow up by fighting the durable gatekeeper Samuel Vargas. Khan won this fight by a 12-round unanimous decision. He dropped Vargas early in the fight, also in the second round, Amir Khan himself got dropped. He certainly had some trouble in this fight, but won it clearly. But it was obvious to see that Amir Khan wasn't the same fighter that he once was. His body looked softer, his legs looked slower, his stamina wasn't as good as it previously was. He still had the hand speed, but everything else was starting to fall apart, and his punch resistance was even worse at this point. He then gets a title shot, somehow, against Terence Crawford for the WBO welterweight title. Predictably, this was one-sided. Khan landed a few shots early on, caught Crawford with a couple of shots, but Crawford really just dog-walked Amir Khan and stopped him in the 5th round. It is worth noting that a couple of the shots were low, but it seemed like Amir Khan was looking for a way out. Now, I've got to be honest, Amir Khan got a lot of criticism after this fight that he quit. And I get it, yeah, we don't like to see fighters take the easy way out, but you have to consider that Amir Khan at this point in time had a very long career, coming off some bad knockout losses. He had some tough moments, and up until this point, Amir Khan always showed tremendous heart. This was Amir Khan way past his best. He had one foot outside of boxing at this point. To really use this to say Amir Khan had no heart, I think is being very dishonest, because Khan always showed heart. For better or worse, Khan always showed heart when he was actually fighting in his prime. You know, there's been so many great fighters over the years who, when they were past their best, they quit in fights. I mean, look at Roberto Duran, look at Mike Tyson. These guys quit. Late in their careers. I'm not saying Khan was as great as those guys, don't get it twisted, but there's a big difference between quitting in your prime and quitting when you're faded, when you're shot, when you've earned all of the money in the world. There's a big difference then, in my opinion. So I felt that was harsh to use this to discredit Amir Khan's career, But nevertheless, he was beaten up, and yeah, it was decisive. It was decisive. And following that, Amir Khan managed to snag himself a big payday in Saudi Arabia, where he fought basically a featherweight or super featherweight in Billy Dib at welterweight. And he was paid some crazy money for this fight. I think Amir Khan said that he was paid like $7 million to fight Billy Dib in Saudi Arabia. Predictably, Khan was too big. He destroys Billy Dib in the 4th round. And finally, 3 years after the Billy Dib fight, we get the Kell Brook fight. At this point in time, both guys shot to bits. Amir Khan, had 5 defeats at this time, was 35 years old. Inactivity as well, hadn't fought for nearly 3 years going into this fight. Kell Brook himself wasn't the most active, coming off a 3rd round knockout defeat to Terence Crawford, and also devastating defeats to Errol Spence and Gennady Golovkin. Both guys were shot to bits. Both guys were past their best. But I'll be honest, I enjoyed the build-up. Amir Khan was trolling Kell Brook throughout, has to be said. And yeah, I mean, the fight itself happened on the 19th of February 2022. And yeah, Kell Brook was just too big, too strong, too powerful, and had a bit more in the tank. Despite being shot himself, he had a bit more in the tank than Amir Khan. And he eventually got rid of Khan in the 6th round of their fight. And that was it. Shortly after, both Kell Brook and Amir Khan announced their retirements from the sport of boxing. Now, these two guys are always going to be linked to each other. And despite Kell Brook beating Amir Khan, in regards to who was greater, I think you have to say Amir Khan. In regards to who he fought, who he beat, Amir Khan definitely had the better resume. Wins over Kotelnik, Marcus Maidana, Paulie Malignaggi, Zab Judah, Louis Collazo, Devin Alexander. Amir Khan's resume certainly had more depth than Kell Brook's, and I think he will go down as the greater fighter. However, I actually believe that Kell Brook was technically the better fighter. I think these guys could have fought any times in their careers, and Kell Brook would have won, in my opinion. I see Kell Brook as a massive waste of talent, whereas Amir Khan, for the most part, he made the most of his ability. Amir Khan was blessed with crazy speed, crazy athleticism, but he never had the greatest ring IQ, and he never had the greatest chin. That is what held Amir Khan back. But if he had those two things, Amir Khan would have been a serious fighter, but you can't have it all. You can't have it all. And at his best, let's be real, from 2009 to 2011, up until the Peterson fight, Amir Khan was the #1 guy at 140 pounds. And quite frankly, when you look at his career, he fought some tremendous fighters. The only real fights in which I would have liked to have seen from Khan in his career that never happened would have been the Kell Brook fight happening earlier, obviously. And apart from that, I guess I would say Timothy Bradley at 140. But that fight was supposed to happen. There was a lot of talks about Bradley versus Khan, but Bradley got the Manny Pacquiao fight. So it never happened. But, Amir Khan fought some great competition, and for better or worse, he was tremendously entertaining. Whether it be the good, the bad, or the ugly, he was entertaining. Super vulnerable, on the end of some savage knockouts, but he got some good wins on his side of the fence as well. And even outside of a ring, Amir Khan was involved in so many scandals, man. So many scandals. Of course, there was the Anthony Joshua situation, where he accused Joshua of sleeping with his wife, and he said that Joshua can have his leftovers. There was that. There was the Bruce Jenner incident, if you remember that. That was hilarious. I mean, Amir Khan he's had so many crazy and funny moments throughout his career. And whether you liked him or not, you can't say you weren't entertained, surely. You can't say you weren't entertained by Amir Khan's career. But, yeah, man, I mean, it was what it was. It was what it was. It was a fun ride. I followed his career basically from start to finish. And, yeah, I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. And, yeah, man, hopefully he has a happy retirement. Hopefully he doesn't spend all of his money and we don't see an ill-advised comeback in a couple of years. But we shall see. I want to ask you guys, what is your favourite Amir Khan memory? What is your favourite Amir Khan memory? I think mine, I would say, I'm not sure for me, quite frankly. I'm not sure. I think the Amir Khan Danny Garcia fight might be up there because how he was winning the fight, then he gets caught, gets knocked out. There was a lot of trash talk before that fight with Danny Garcia's dad, Angel Garcia. He was saying some, distasteful things about Amir Khan and his heritage. I mean, that fight was crazy. Amir Khan's had a great career, man. He's had a great career. I enjoyed it. What about you guys? Share your favourite Amir Khan memory below. I'm interested to hear what yours are. Share yours below. Beanie Guy Del Boy, I hope you enjoyed this video. Something a bit different. Peace.